the black man, white woman was the great historical taboo. It was salacious and saucy. But if you take nothing else from this discussion, please realize it's really not that big of a deal. It doesn't happen that often. And when it does happen, most people don't even care. Hello again. Welcome to The Ruthless Truth. I am your host, Truth Davis. In this forum, I share opinions, thoughts, truths on a wide variety of topics based on what I consider to be a unique life experience. My intent is to share stories and experiences and hopefully provide some life lessons that will help you on your journey. Please follow me on Instagram at TruthDavis5, and you can also find the podcast wherever you find podcasts and subscribe. General format, I'll share some thoughts on current news, and then I'll have a deeper discussion on one topic, which will be today's truth. And then I like to finish with an American history fun fact. Okay. So I just want to share a few thoughts on the current state of the U.S. economy. I considered going deeper on this in today's truth, but as I started to get further into it, I realized that while I find this information very interesting, many others would probably find it, if not boring, definitely not exciting. That said, it's important that you maintain a basic understanding of the U.S. and world economies because it affects your life in so many ways. I recognize the information in the media reports can be somewhat overwhelming, so I'll just make a few points here. First, there's not just one economy. There's national, there's state, and local. And depending on which economic factor we're discussing, the variances can be pretty wide between states and cities. But here, I'll just note a few key national factors. Okay, interest rates. You've probably seen the reports that the president is pressuring the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, to lower interest rates. Why? Well, because lower interest rates stimulate economic activity by making borrowing more affordable, thus encouraging people to spend more. And nearly 70% of the U.S. economy is fueled by consumer spending. The lower borrowing costs also make it easier for businesses to get loans, invest in their businesses, and create new jobs. Also, mortgage rates generally fall when the interest rate is lower, making it more affordable to buy a home. And as to your money, there are a couple of impacts. Low interest rate usually stimulates growth in the stock market as the price of bonds increase when the interest rate is reduced. So, if all this goodness comes from lowering rates, why would Powell resist lowering them? Well, that's because there are some downsides to lowering interest rates. Primarily, it often leads to increased inflation. And second, it's not good news for savers, as banks will lower the interest they pay on CDs and savings accounts. Okay, that's interest rates. Another factor is inflation. The current inflation environment is volatile due to the uncertainty about the effects of tariffs and the timing of the potential interest rate changes. As inflation rises, your purchasing power decreases. This is important when you're considering your investment strategy. Because if your portfolio is increasing 4%, but the current inflation is 5%, your real return is actually negative. This is especially important for people on fixed incomes, such as retirees. One other subject, student loan repayment. So beginning in July 1st, 2026, there will be new changes and policies that go into effect for repayments for new loans. For existing loan borrowers, your changes don't go into effect until July 1st, 2028. Last one is taxes. Congress and the White House recently approved many changes to the U.S. tax code. Some of these changes are permanent, some of them are temporary. And while there are many changes, almost all of us will be impacted in some way. So as you plan and budget for the future, be sure to discuss these with your tax preparer, or if you self-prepare, do some research. As the year progresses, I will occasionally discuss other economic factors that may interest you, but for now, let's get to today's truth. Today's truth. Generally, I try not to focus too much on race-based discussions, not because they're not relevant, but because, as I recently stated, as a nation, we have far more in common than we have differences, regardless of race, political party, gender, or geography. Now, I will acknowledge the differences are greater when we talk about wealth, because the rich live in a very different America than the general population. But race is an inescapable topic. If for no other reason, the media loves to discuss it. The subject can be emotional, provocative, divisive, and confrontational, which is always good for stimulating discussion and attention. All that said, I want to talk about interracial marriage in general and black and white interracial relationships in particular. There's been an increased discussion on this topic in social media and news outlets due to some recent high-profile celebrity news stories and comments. Specifically, the recent Shannon Sharpe developments have ignited discussion not only about older men and younger women, but also about rich black men and white women. Additionally, former NBA star Paul Pierce made some controversial statements commenting on why black athletes prefer white women. It's been 58 years since the Supreme Court ruled in Loving versus Virginia that made interracial marriage legal in all 50 states. And over this past 6 decades, our society has mostly approved of interracial marriage to the point that it's mainstream and widely accepted. In fact, over 90% of Americans now approve of interracial marriage. In 1967, that percentage was only 20%. And unlike the recent past, the regional and age differences in approval have pretty much dissipated. So, if interracial relationships are so widely accepted, why is there still so much media coverage and discussion about the topic? I think there are a few reasons, which I'll get to in a couple of minutes. But before we get into the discussions, let's list some facts and data. Then I want to outline a couple of truths. The numbers. For the purpose of this discussion, race refers to black, white, Hispanic, or Asian. And while there are slight variations depending on data source, approximately 20% of marriages in the U.S. are interracial. I'm also not addressing same-sex unions, but just know that gay marriages are even more likely to be interracial. Okay. That said, the most common interracial combinations in order are white man, Hispanic woman, white man, Asian woman, black man, white woman. Black women are the least likely to be in an interracial marriage, with only 12% marrying outside their race, as compared to over 20% for black men in an interracial marriage. Okay, that's the numbers. Here are a couple of accompanying truths. First, you can't help who you fall in love with, which is usually a good thing when it's just organic and two people find each other. So for many couples, they weren't necessarily looking for an interracial marriage. It just happened. Second, it's fairly clear now that racism will always be with us. I will acknowledge race relations continue to improve, but there will always be prejudice, bigots, and people who hate others simply because of their race. Now, back to the topic at hand. If interracial marriage is more widely accepted than ever, why are so many people still talking about it? Well, I think most of this discussion focuses on black men and white women, which again is only the third most common situation, but clearly the most visible. But you never hear anything about the other interracial combinations that are actually far more common. Why not? It's probably because the black man, white woman was the great historical taboo. It was salacious and saucy. But if you take nothing else from this discussion, please realize it's really not that big of a deal. It doesn't happen that often. And when it does happen, most people don't even care. But fueling the ongoing discussions are a couple of narratives that are prevailing, provocative, yet mostly untrue. Narrative 1. Successful black men are more likely to marry white women. What's driving that narrative? Well, a major factor appears to be the number of high-profile black men who choose white spouses, especially celebrities and athletes. This list includes Patrick Mahomes, Robert Griffin III, Eddie Murphy, Donald Glover Jr., and many others. But as noticed in previous episodes, athletes and celebrities comprise less than 2% of the millionaires in this country. So while they are visible, they are not representative. The truth? The overwhelming majority of high-earning black men are married to black women. Specifically, of black men earning at least $100,000 a year, 85% are married to black women, which is a much higher percentage than for black men making less than $100,000 a year. That said, I do strongly believe there is a small segment of black men who do see having a white wife as some symbol of success and status. They often strut with an air of, I've made it, almost if with their success, they deserve to have the American beauty ideal. Additionally, many of these men believe having a white spouse will increase their acceptance and inclusion with their white male colleagues and friends. Ladies and gentlemen, these are some sadly delusional individuals. Many people will say this is a sign of racial self-hatred. That's probably the case in a few of these situations, but I think it's more likely they just want to be accepted. They recognize the power hierarchy in this country, and there's no denying who occupies the top spot. I was recently reviewing the black Republicans who hold national office. There's one senator, 5 congressmen, and 1 Supreme Court justice. Specifically, they are Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, and then Congressman Byron Daniels of Florida, Wesley Hunt in Texas, John James in Michigan, and Burgess Owens in Utah. And then their Supreme Court Justice, Clarence Thomas. 6 black Republicans. How many of them would you guess have white wives? The answer is 5. I recognize it's a small sample size, but 5 of 6 black Republicans have white spouses as compared to the national average, which would project that to be only 1 out of 6. So what's my take on this? Let me first say, I have no evidence, perspective, insight, or feedback of any kind. So this is truly just my opinion. But I believe these men think this makes them more acceptable to their predominantly white colleagues, that they will not be perceived as a threatening black man who will push a race-based agenda. The irony? I think it actually lowers their position. They don't gain any points by rejecting black women. And there's still some older men who don't appreciate black men who chase white women. The greatest value that conservatives see in black Republicans, they can go on national news program and say the racially tinged comments and attacks that a white conservative can't say. These men campaigned tirelessly for Donald Trump. Remember when Tim Scott supported Donald Trump instead of his fellow South Carolinian Nikki Haley? They were on stage and Trump said, "Man, you must really hate Nikki." And he said, "No, I just love you." And what was the reward for this undying allegiance and support to the Republican cause? Nothing. Not a thing. Not one of these men received a cabinet position in the administration. Hell, they didn't even get a consideration. Again, some sad and delusional individuals. Okay, narrative 2. Black women are difficult, so it's easier to be with a white woman. Here's the flaw in this narrative. Neither white women nor black women are monolithic. It's almost impossible to make a broad, sweeping claim that is accurate across all races. Some people are nice, some are difficult, some are passive, some are aggressive. So if a man is looking for an accommodating spouse, that's what he'll find, regardless of race. And here's something you never hear in the media or social commentary. Far and away, the most stable interracial marriage combination is a white man with a black woman. Let me say that again. Far and away, the most stable interracial marriage combination is a white man married to a black woman. These couples are the least likely to end in divorce, more though than any other marriage, whether it's intra or interracial, and over 40% less likely to divorce than the combination of a white man and a white woman. Why do you think that is? Okay, I'll tell you why. In one of the early episodes of The Ruthless Truth, I talked about marriage trends and noted that people get married for a variety of reasons. Besides love, they may marry for financial stability, social climbing, children, other reasons. But when a white man chooses to marry a black woman, it is almost always for love. Because not only are there no external advantages, there are also quite often disadvantages and negative responses for him. He will often face criticism from colleagues, friends, and family members. Marrying a black woman doesn't elevate his status with them, and unfortunately, many of the people in his circle will think less of him. So why would he choose to take all that heat and face those headwinds? The only logical reason is because he really loves her. And that's the foundation for a happy and long-lasting relationship. Again, you can't help who you fall in love with. So let me summarize with these key points. Despite the media's effort to make it controversial, interracial marriage is acceptable to 94% of Americans. Second, the majority of black men are married to black women, and for successful black men, even more so. Number 3, the most stable interracial marriage combination is that of a white man with a black woman. Interracial marriage is a non-issue for most Americans. Let's not keep trying to make it an issue. Okay, let's move on. Let's get to today's American history fun fact. Okay, today's American history fun fact. You know, many of my previous fun facts told stories of individuals or events that were mostly unknown. That's not the case today. I will assume almost all of you have heard of Bonnie and Clyde, the notorious bank robbing couple of the 1930s. You probably learned about them from the 1967 motion picture starring Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. Well, as is in common in Hollywood, the film took many creative licenses and flat-out inaccuracies to produce a compelling movie. And it worked. The film was a critical and commercial success, remaining a top 12 box office movie for 22 consecutive weeks and earning 9 Oscars, including a win for Estelle Parsons for Best Supporting Actress. But today, I'm going to tell you the true story of Bonnie and Clyde, including their unique legacy in the U.S. insurance industry. First, Bonnie and Clyde were really young. At the time of their deaths, Clyde was 25 while Bonnie was only 23. Second, they were really small in stature. Clyde stood at 5 feet 4 inches while Bonnie was only 4'11". Okay, to the truth. Bonnie Parker was born in 1910 in Rowena, Texas, and from an early age, it was clear she was a smart and artistic child. In 1926, a week before her 16th birthday, she dropped out of school and married her high school classmate, Roy Thornton. The marriage was rocky, and after 3 years was practically over. And while Bonnie never saw him again after 1929, they never divorced, and she was still married and wearing her wedding ring on the day she died. After the breakup of her marriage, she moved back in with her mother and worked as a waitress in Dallas. Clyde Barrow was born in 1909 in Ellis County, Texas, making him 18 months older than Bonnie. His family was quite poor and later moved to Dallas. He was first arrested at age 17 for failing to return a rental car on time. And then soon after that, he was arrested for possession of stolen turkeys. From there, Barrow was a career criminal involved in burglaries, robberies, and successful prison escapes. And while there are various accounts, most historians believe Bonnie and Clyde first met in 1930 at the home of one of Clyde's friends. He was 20, she was 19. So Clyde continued his life of crime, and in February 1932 was released from prison after serving time for various crimes. In April of that same year, Bonnie was arrested for a failed robbery of a hardware store where she and an accomplice was trying to steal firearms. She was released after a few months. But during Bonnie's time in jail, Clyde had formed a gang that committed several robberies and even killed a deputy sheriff in Oklahoma. So by the end of 1932, Bonnie had joined the gang, and in March 1933, Clyde's brother, Buck, was pardoned and released from prison. Buck and his wife, Blanche, joined the group, and the Barrow Gang was formed. The very next month, a 5-man team of law officers attempted to apprehend the gang at their hideout, which was in Joplin, Missouri. There was a shootout, and 2 of the officers were killed. The police subsequently discovered arms, books, and some undeveloped film. The film was later developed and included many glamorous photos of the gang posing with weapons. The pictures were published in the newspaper, and the press and Bonnie became known nationwide. There was especially one picture that showed Bonnie holding a gun and smoking a cigar, and the press described her as the cigar-smoking gun moll. The irony of it is, Bonnie didn't even smoke cigars. From 1933 to 1934, the gang committed several robberies and sometimes kidnapped policemen or other citizens. They usually released the hostages soon after, but they didn't hesitate to shoot at anyone who got in their way. They were involved in several shootouts, including a prison break of some of their captured gang members. In all, during their criminal run, the gang killed 12 people, including 9 law officers. In June 1933, Bonnie was seriously injured in a car accident and suffered severe burns. She never regained full use of her right leg and had to hop or be carried for the remainder of her life. Well, it all came to an end in May 1934 when Bonnie and Clyde were ambushed by a posse on a Louisiana highway. Over 130 rounds were fired into their car, which each of them struck multiple times. A couple of final points. Although they were notorious criminals, Bonnie and Clyde each had active insurance policies that were paid. And from that moment on, the policy of payouts for life insurance has changed to exclude payouts in cases of deaths caused by any criminal act by the insured. And then a final point. Bonnie and Clyde were together really for only 4 years. And while they were often depicted as prolific bank robbers during this time, in reality, they robbed fewer than 15 banks in total. All right. That's all I have for you today on The Ruthless Truth. Thank you so much for listening. Again, please follow on Instagram at TruthDavis5, and you can find the podcast wherever you get podcasts, and remember to subscribe. On social media, there is a YouTube channel as well as Ruthless Truth on Facebook. I look forward to speaking to you soon, and take care, everybody.